Hi, I'm Thomas Winstanley. I'm the Executive Vice President and General Manager of edibles.com, which is part of the Edible Brands family, most universally known for edible arrangements. And I started in July of 2024, and we launched our platform in March of 2025. And yeah, super stoked to chat all the things that we're doing and
Yeah.
everything that comes along with the crazy hemp world.
So let's jump in with like an initial cloud level for everybody. Kind of
Yeah.
like what is it that you guys do? And I received your package and stuff like that, so I got a really good snapshot. But that way we can transcend that for everybody else to understand what it is you do and what role you serve in the industry.
Yeah, so I edibles.com is a wholesale marketplace for hemp-derived THC beverages, gummies, and when I started, what was interesting is they had this IP and they were like, "We have edibles.com." And at the time I was working in the cannabis industry. I'd been CMO for about 6 years of one of the largest independent operators in the Northeast. And one of the things that I have really loved studying hemp while I was in the regulated cannabis markets was hemp is this Trojan horse to accessibility for consumers. Because of the federal classification, it can reach a much larger TAM than, say, one regulated market versus another. And that opportunity to me was incredibly powerful. And what they had with this IP, they had some ideas of how to commercialize it. And there was a lot of overlap between what my strategy would be and what they wanted to do, with some nuance and with a really strong understanding of the category. We wanted to fill this white space of building a very easy to navigate, simplified approach to purchasing hemp derived products. And part of the advantage in the white space was, sure, you see these products everywhere, but this is a very complicated category to enter into. And we've seen this introduction of many consumers into the hemp industry. Our job has been, well, how do we bring more customers into this category? What can we do to help build a better mousetrap to ease these customers into this category and do all the research so they don't have to worry about it? So they know if they're purchasing from us, there is a built in safety, trust, reliability, legality component. Because certainly having edible brands looming behind in the background, that makes it a little bit of an easier step into the category, knowing that it's not just a gas station brand or somewhere that, you don't really have that trust and reliability into. And so the portfolio itself is very curated. A lot of the brands that I'm working with, I knew from past lives in cannabis. And I also know that a lot of those actors, for the most part, they know regulatory, they know compliance, they know formulations, you know, they have efficacy in their products that have made them the leaders. And so I got to culminate all of these kind of very interesting, insights within the category as somebody who watched from the outside to build the ideal platform as I see it, as a place where for anybody within, if you're a very well initiated consumer who knows these brands and these products and know your dosing and all this stuff, well, we got stuff for you. If you're somebody who has no clue where to start, well, we can also help you there. And the last thing I'll share that I think is helpful in what that strategy wasn't really about come here and buy THC. Like that's kind of implied by the name edibles.com. And I think part of what my goal has been is help people shop based on their outcomes that they're seeking, not based on just go and get stoned and try it and see how you feel. I think a very key education point for consumers is don't just buy to get high, go buy for a functional health and wellness based outcome that these products can deliver to you. And I think in a lot of ways, we see this in functional beverages, where you're buying beverages based on the outcomes, whether it's kombucha for gut health or Hilo for functional, relaxation, things like this. Well, we wanted to kind of take that model and scale it broadly with this category as part of that Trojan horse. And so that's really the genesis of where this all came about. And that's what we've been really marching towards for the last year and a half or so.
I appreciate the way you laid it out because that's exactly why I reached out to you all. I mean, I've been in this space for a couple of years now, and from the service side, from strategy and things like that. And there's been a lot of opportunities of e-commerce brands and things like that in the hemp space, but nothing that aligned with the mission
Yeah,
of the brands that I work with. And that was always the biggest hang up. And you have other ones that I won't name, any other platforms that exist for wholesale operations and things like that. But even then, they're not specifically to this niche of exactly what you just said. It's not about getting high and it's not about checking out. It's not about that traditional objective that you had when you were a binge drinker or you were drinking
yeah,
alcohol. And I'm speaking from somebody that works in the alcohol industry currently. So I can say
you know
this without
it. Yeah,
exactly, is that it's a different presence, and it
yeah,
is presence. And it is, and that's, really wanted to talk to you about that because these episodes, especially the interviews with founders and different people in this hemp brand space, that is what the mission is. And I think that's what I want to do, is elevate these stories so people realize it's not a bunch of tie-dye stoners with hemp necklaces anymore. I mean, they're there
precisely.
and
Yeah,
we're with them and we're hanging with them, but that's not how the business operates.
yeah, and that's actually like I love that you brought that up because my son this morning was wearing one of my tie-dyed shirts because like
I'm the same way.
I also like very much am a part of that culture. I've always been a part of that
Yeah.
culture. But I also think too, what is interesting to kind of go back to the point about alcohol. So I worked on Remy Martin's North American portfolio for a few years when I was in New York in advertising. And it's kind of ironic where you are not allowed to advertise getting drunk. Like that is not a selling point. Is it an inherent insight to the products? Absolutely. But you're not allowed to sell that. And right now we're doing a lot of selling of getting high. And I think there's a lot of issues with that to some extent. And I think hemp is not that. And I
Mhm.
want to stress that the way I see the category, where I see the future of policy, where I see a divide between regulated cannabis and regulated hemp, I think there are two different approaches to the consumers. And what we were really passionate about is the wellness side. I mean, as much as I love that culture, I also know that a lot of people who are coming into this category, they're not necessarily looking for that. And how do we build a category that has mass scale that is not focused on being stoned? And like,
Mhm.
sure, being stoned is great. Like, I love it. I'm a non-school night user. We were talking about having kids. Like,
Yeah.
I got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Like, I like to be very conservative with my use these days. I still try a lot of products. I see a lot of good stuff. I see a lot of bad stuff. But I think what really needs the mechanism for growth in the category has to be a little bit more disciplined in the message. And I think by not having been so in the past few years in the hemp industry, we've run into a lot of these regulatory challenges. There's certainly people who do not ascribe to this value that I have. I'm not saying one value is right or
Mhm.
wrong, but I think my personal perception of what is helpful for the category growth is let's make sure we're providing a lot of good education and let's really use this plant to help offer wellness alternatives, which is really what is driving people in the category, whether it's alcohol replacement with beverages or some type of chew or edible for sleep aid. I think all of these things, I think we can do all of these things very rationally, reasonably, in a way that I think also lawmakers want to see. And so I think we've buried the lead a little bit in terms of the category. And that's where I think when we came in and the way I wanted to build this with the team here was let's really be dedicated to the wellness end. And let's be very focused and let's draw some lines in the sand, dosing caps on our website, the types of products we feature, making sure that we have a blend that falls into a category, not just some distillate gummy that is 30 milligrams or 50 milligrams. Let's be very prescriptive about what that portfolio needs to look like. And so far that's served us well, but there also gives us room for broader expansion as time goes on.
It's also interesting, like, over the past 5 years, I do a lot of interviews of like finding people's audience profiles and their target profiles. And a lot of people made a lot of assumptions years ago about what their target consumer was. And I think now that and I like your laugh there because it's true. I think a
It's
lot of
just so
people
funny. Yeah.
in the last 12 months have had a real identity crisis,
Yeah, I
realizing that
agree.
their consumer sways way older than they really thought,
Yeah.
and realize that the get high and on your own supply thing is relevant to them because they have responsibilities in life. It's not. It's actually like, if you don't ignore the data, our
Yeah.
consumers swinging way higher than we really thought as an industry, and we need to adapt our messaging accordingly.
Well, I mean, and it's so funny because I get to, one of the things I love about this job is I get to talk to so many
Mhm.
CEOs and leaders of companies. And what is always so eye-opening to me is hearing them talk about who their customers are. And one of the one of the most interesting things about this category is one, we haven't gone through price normalization. At least on beverages, I'll say. Gummies, I
Yeah.
think, and chews, we've seen a little bit more of a categorical price normalization because of the ability to produce these products and the cogs that go into manufacturing these products. And what's interesting to me is I think part of what is driving what is this growth is we the Nancy Reagan era generations who have always been told no are finally getting a chance to say yes. And I think they have been deprived of these things. I think, the boomer generation probably would have loved these products,
We
at a
gotta we
different
gotta
time.
remember too, reefer madness was drilled into their brains at a
Yeah.
very vulnerable time in their life.
Yeah, and I actually give, I did a presentation in Atlanta a few months ago, and I actually put up a huge photo of Nancy Reagan as one of the best marketers around this category because she did a great job communicating what she thought was right, which is just say no. And I think now we've really slowly chipped away at that perception. And I think everybody today knows somebody who likes a gummy or likes an infused beverage. And I think we're now seeing that group of individuals coming into the category. They have high discretionary income. They are learning, they're health conscious. They're learning that alcohol may have more adverse implications than previously understood. They're looking for alternatives, and then we just happen to be there. And the amount of causality or correlation between alcohol decline in comparison to hemp beverage growth, I don't know that you can directly draw the correlation, but I think there's a causality piece
Mhm.
there. And I think those consumers are finally able to enjoy these things that are previously have been told they are not allowed to enjoy and that they're dangerous and that they're poisonous and yada, 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 yada. And so I think this is when we get back to the consumers. I am not totally surprised. And we see the same thing on our end with our
Yeah, I was never surprised, yeah.
yeah, there's no surprise in that. But I love to see it. Like I
I always
love to
show
see
my
these
I show my poker face in the beginning because when I ask them, I'll just be like right off the bat, I'm like, "What's your target consumer?" They're like, "Anybody 25 to 55," and I just laugh out loud, but just like you did, where I'm like, "You guys have not asked anybody what's going on." The funny thing is recently, like, I speak with a lot of distributors in Pennsylvania as we're gearing up for our hemp beverage bill, to get a number on it in our campaign, and the interesting thing is I'm getting callbacks now more than ever
yeah.
because what happened in Pennsylvania was it's all a lot of DTC in Pennsylvania because we don't have proper access to market. And every distributor that's finally starting to return phone calls, it's because they went to the Super Bowl party, and all of a
They
sudden
saw yeah.
they looked around the room and they said every single one of them said more than half, probably 75% of the room was not drinking alcohol. They were drinking these products,
Yeah.
and they're
I
like,
mean,
"I get it now." That was literally they were like, "I get it now."
yeah. I mean, I will say, so I'm a New England guy. I grew up in Massachusetts. I now live in Atlanta, and my in-laws are from South Carolina. And I've shared this, publicly a few times. But what I find really interesting is, I've been with my wife almost 10 years. So I've known her parents for a very, very long time. We've been married for almost 10 years. And the time at which I started into the industry to where we are today, I've actually watched them evolve with the work that I've done. Where at first it was you're going into cannabis? Like, are you gonna have health insurance? Is it legal? Do you have a 401k? And it's like, no, like of course, like we're good. And then, fast forward to now, when I go and visit, I love to bring them products. And I say, you know, they're both doctors. And I'll go to my mother-in-law and say, is your hip better? I brought these high CBD, low THC gummies. I know the THC kind of messes with your sleep, but like this might help you. To my father-in-law, I'll say, hey, I have this beverage additive. When you make your martini on Friday, put like 2 drops and let me know how you feel. What is amazing is the adoption that we're seeing in some very traditional conservative states to now embrace this category. It is a sea change moment. I mean, I think this is a huge bellwether moment in an American industry that will continue to grow with this major CPG boom that is basically seed to retail, seed to
Hmm.
consumer. And I think there's something really powerful about that. And I think again, with policy today, there's a lot that's going into kind of how it's being perceived at a federal level. But, my point being is that I think we're now seeing this massive influx of customers where, yeah, maybe there's still taboo if you go out and smoke a joint and you smell like it and you come inside and that may be off putting. But I don't think there's a part of this country today where somebody drinking an infused beverage or eating, an edible I don't think it carries the same baggage that it did 5 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago. Um, and I think that's what just excites me because I
Hmm.
think THC accessibility is critical to the future of our country.
The front end of the accessibility thing is a big part of mine, and I want to say it with you because you are very ingrained in policy and things like that. And you see the forest from the trees, so I want to say this to you: is let's talk a little bit about getting consumers and legislators and those to understand that it's not a infighting of we don't want to be in dispensary networks. It's actually just the functionality of how the consumer runs through the dosage journey. And in
Yes.
actuality, if you put it in an open market and a age gated section like an alcohol network for the front end, then you have like go back to craft beer. A lot of not, I would go out on a limb and say 80% of craft beer consumers became heavy craft beer consumers and early adopters via Blue Moon, Shock Top, those types of things that were the early access adopter. Then you
Yeah.
ran into the journey, and in 5 years, you were drinking triple IPAs and you're going to beer dinners. And that was, but it started with the right Blue Moon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how the access is so
Yeah.
important also to lift the membership and patient quotas of those dispensaries. So if it's out there further, because people don't realize that exactly like you just said, that taboo will always exist in the dispensary network because it has to because of the restrictions and everything like that. The industry as a whole is behooved as a whole if these small products can be early adoption in a wider access market, and also the fact that they don't drive in the same channel anyway.
Yeah. I think that hits a nail on the head. And it's ironic because what I actually to go back, I love that you go back to the Blue Moon era, and I'm a mass guy. I grew up drinking Sam Adams, like, the first real national craft brewing group, and
Hmm.
they were the ones who lobbied for higher production output to maintain classification of craft. Like, but even going back further, if you look to the repeal of the Volstead Act in 1933, when at the end of Prohibition, let us not forget beer was state by state regulated. And so this is something that I don't think is talked about enough in the public eye, where everybody's like, well, this is confusing and it's hard. And it's like, well, it should be, but also we have precedent here. And I'm not saying alcohol and hemp are one to one, but I think history is moves in a similar fashion. And so when it comes to accessibility, what I think is important, having been on the cannabis regulated market side, my company, Theory Wellness, who I worked with, when I started, we had two medical dispensaries in Massachusetts. When I left, we had 18 dispensaries across 6 states. Vertical integration, we did the whole thing. And I will tell you, the people who go to a dispensary, a lot of those people are going to a dispensary for a certain subset of products. They're looking for inhalables, they're looking for higher dosing. A lot of the consumers today are not necessarily they are still looking for those. There's a big subset of people who want that. But I think the consumers in the hemp category, they're not necessarily competition to dispensaries. They're people who want to do alcohol replacement, or they want to maybe stop taking melatonin and try CBN, CBD, and THC. They want an OTC experience for those products. And those products don't really make a ton of money for dispensaries today. Dispensary margins today are from high dosage, come from a lot of manufacturing a lot of manufacturing cogs that go into making those. Those are higher margin. And so we're meeting the consumer where they are. Well, if they're looking for a beverage that's going to be an alternative to alcohol, we'll put it into a liquor store because that's where they're going to go shop for it. And that's where we've conditioned them to shop. I think the same case can be made with edibles. I think edibles align much closer to a nutraceutical dietary supplement category where there's not the FDA approval to say that this is going to solve your sleep issues, but it may influence it in the same way that magnesium or
Hmm.
melatonin may. And so I think you have to build a regulatory framework that meets the customers where they are. We were chatting about the Philadelphia or the Pennsylvania discussions on policy. I think putting these products into a dispensary is actually going to be harmful to the dispensary. I think it's actually going to undermine their bottom line having to buy wholesale products that are going to be, they're treated very differently. Wholesale.
Six of the space and storage needed.
Yeah, and beverages, obviously you have a major storage input requirement. Just a quick story about beverages. So my last company, we were one of the first beverage manufacturers on the East Coast in the regulated cannabis market in Massachusetts. So Mass was the first recreational market. We were like second into the market by like a week. We built an in-house canning line. We developed our own products and recipe formulations. The brand's called High Five. We sold 1 million units in the first 6 months. And the first problem we had was, oh my gosh, dispensaries are not built to store pallets of beverages. And I was
They
like,
they need they need deliveries like once or twice 2 to 3 times a week, and that's
oh
that's a
yeah.
huge problem.
Yeah, and I think, when I look forward to today's market, yeah, it actually makes a ton of sense for tier 3 to have some involvement in that. And I think the same thing can be said with edibles. I think in the same way that you can go online and order supplements, I think you should be able to buy, CBD hemp
Mhm.
infused gummies over the internet. Beverages doesn't really make a ton of sense because, I'll tell you from somebody who runs DTC that has beverages, that's not a great economic business. And, so I think there's this consumers want to shop for these products in the places that they're used to buying, comp products. Dispensaries don't make all of their money selling low dose products. They make most of the money selling high dose products. That to me is the bifurcation of reach. A lot of the people that are 55 and older, they're not necessarily going in to go buy high dose products. Sure, you can make a case that there are some people like everything. However, at the end of the day, they want to go buy these things where it's convenient for their lifestyle.
Mhm.
If they want a package of wild Wana Camino sent to their door once a month, great. And they may want to grab Breeze or Can Trip at the local grocery store or at their liquor store where they're buying wine. And just this last week at WSWA's national conference, there was the CEO of Total Wine who was saying, this category isn't cannibalizing, it's actually melding, where it's not like people go in just to buy hemp beverages. They're buying hemp beverages with Coors Light or, Chardonnay or whatever it is. And so I think we're starting to get to this place
Also,
where,
the new consumers on that is a key piece as well to his quote. It was like, I forget what it was. 30% is like where they're going is the 30% of the consumers who walk in the door going to the cat gondola. And then out of that 30%, 60% have never walked in the door before, something crazy like that.
yeah. And again, like I think for me, it's like a path of least resistance and it's all based around the consumer. Right. I think as soon as, I've talked a lot about this, doing press interviews about policy, but nobody wins from prohibition at this point. Nobody is going to have, people are so reliant on these products at this point, and it's so indexed in modern society that there is no step backwards that doesn't cause some very material consumer health issues. And
And
that
it's
to
a
me is
it's
really
a saving grace too for these other businesses. And I went through New Jersey and interviewed about 100 different retailers a couple months ago, and I wanted to know like how much they're selling of it, what their ratios are. These guys are giving me 20 to 30% of their revenue is being drawn out of hemp beverages. And then my last question that made two of them break down and cry in the middle of me face to face interviewing them was, "What would you do if this disappeared tomorrow?"
ugh, yeah, that just, and honestly,
Because what we're not realizing is while some places like the media wants to spin that alcohol is against cannabis, maybe the manufacturers are in some way that we can talk about, but when it comes down to the trickle down of the tiers, every distributor I speak to says this is a life-saving opportunity and a golden egg for us, and every retailer says exactly the same thing.
yeah, and I think part of what has been very interesting about the hemp industry is if you look at going into, let's just say you make a beverage brand and you want to go to dispensaries, that is incredibly capital intensive. You need to get a license, you need to get co-packing agreements. Even if you make 5 milligram drinks, trying to compete in that channel is super difficult. And, I kind of alluded earlier to we kind of are curated brands. Like we have all
Mhm.
the big names. What I get most excited about is as I started and I said, okay, I want all the cannabis adjacent brands because they have good total addressable market share, they're established, they're also less compliance risk. The kind of the second portion of this then became very interesting to me about all of these other brands that are hemp native brands that have made absolutely incredible products. And when I look at what Breeze has done, Aaron is an interesting guy. And I think what he did was brilliant. Even with I remember the first time I had a cannabis infused beverage that was and I remember sitting out with a couple of friends and I was like, hey, you guys want to try a weed drink? And they're like, whoa. And I was also like, whoa, this is crazy. And as soon as it touched my lips, I thought, this is going to change everything. And hemp has created this entrepreneurial network of brands that are so native into the space who have, one brand I talked to quite a bit. They basically went to all these liquor stores themselves and they hit the pavement and they gave samples and they fought for their first, first, wholesale agreements themselves. And that's really hard to do in alcohol today.
Mhm.
It's really hard to do in regulated markets. And I think part of the blossoming growth of the category has come from this really strong entrepreneurial spirit. And a lot of these great companies that I talk to now, not only are they making these products, but they are working directly with farmers who are making the biomass. They are investing in those farm ecosystems. This to me is part of what I think makes why those numbers are increasing because these products are terrific. And when I came into all of this, I had an idea of what a gummy was and what an edible was. And in the last probably year or so, I have tried so many form factors of chews, beverages, beverage additives, large formats that have really changed my institutional knowledge of THC application and that to me, I think benefits the consumers
Mhm.
in so many different ways where there is a point of entry for everybody from form factor, dosing, cannabinoid blends, and not to just make it all, rainbows and sunshine. There's also a lot of bad stuff out there too. Like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. Like there's a lot of stuff that I, cringe.
And off of what you just said too, it's those native brands, they went out and they dug the pavement and did all that for them. And I did it alongside of them for the past couple of years. And then the interesting part is there's another split there where it's bad actors and then also it's brands that are native in the space, understood how to create beautiful products, but then the world of wholesale distribution and shelf velocity and go to market strategies is so foreign. I feel like sometimes that stunted their growth sometimes because then you have to find outside services and then you get burned by, then there's also bad actors in that world. And it's like, it then becomes a ripple of stunted growth and velocity.
Absolutely. And I think part of where we're trying to I think there's a lot of right sizing right now around this is, you know, I think the embracing of the distributor and wholesaler networks have been powerful. I mean, even in I would say 2025 was the year of wholesalers have entered the chat, if you will. And I think that's been a really positive thing because, we're actually opening a retail store here in Atlanta, the first edibles.com retail location.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, and that was something that I was really excited about because having worked on, you know, almost 20 dispensaries, like I kind of have this idea of what I want this experience to
Mhm.
be like. And getting connected to our first time we're working with distributors is really awesome. Of like, oh, I have a menu of things I can choose from. The prices are really good. The service levels are really fantastic. And again, I think the more doors we have seen open up to these products, the more we're going to index further. And I also think one of the values that I would argue beverages have over edibles is, yeah, tier three system has a lot of the fail safes. But I also would caution too, there are also a lot of independent retailers who do not have liquor licenses or
Yes.
alcohol licenses. And I will say from my own personal view, that's a delicate balance. I think DTC's nice to have for brands. I know certain brands want to keep DTC. I know some distributors and wholesalers and retailers don't like that, but I think, there's got to be some form of compromise. I don't know if it's a necessarily like maybe it's more like a wine that you can import and sell direct to consumer. I think there's a lot of this stuff that's got to wash out in the
Hmm.
next year or so. And maybe even not in the next year, maybe the next 10 years we have to figure some of this out. But I do think there's this very interesting relationship developing currently around does this category does this category evolve into a landscape that continues to preserve the safety and equity of what people are looking for? And it's wild to be right in the middle of it because I love beverages and I love edibles, and so we're kind of right in this crux of you look at our business every day and say what might happen and what may we have to do, and I think everybody's going through that.
It's one of the, I'm glad you brought up the different channels of distribution because it's one of the things in our bill in Pennsylvania that we have where currently like our products are distributed through a company called Barback PA. And so they are barely for hire subset of the alcohol industry because of different laws that have come through. They needed to build a sub support for in-state manufacturers. So then they were able to realize, okay, we have everybody can buy hemp beverages that's not an alcohol establishment in Pennsylvania. So that's where our laws are reversed right now. We're trying to reverse the law.
Yeah,
So they're going to get grandfathered into it where they'll be able to support the non-alcohol establishments who are also compliant and have a hemp beverage permit as well. So the hemp beverage permit will go to any retailer that is compliant with the policies below that permit.
that I mean, and honestly, I think that's the smartest
Yeah.
regulatory approach. I always say it's tier three and
Yep.
it's tier three and independent licensure for hemp specific businesses. That to me makes a lot of sense. If you have an alcohol license and you have a liquor license, you don't need a hemp license, or maybe you just need to check a box.
It's just a bolt on. Yep. Exactly.
And then for all the independent entrepreneurs who are running sober shops or things like
Mhm.
that, the rise of sober shops can't be underscored either. And I think you have to be able to preserve both parts of the market. And I think that's an important part. DTC for me is like, that's a big part of our business.
Mhm.
I don't think necessarily, am I betting big on DTC beverages in our future? Like, maybe not so much. Like, it's really hard for us to compete directly with
Well,
some
just from a logistics of weight, I mean, I've been dealing with beverage 12-ounce and 16-ounce cans
liquids.
my whole life. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like it's crazy, but that being said, I actually still order can cases like once a month. Like when their cranberry sage dropped, I was like, I immediately bought 2 cases of it because I love that product so
Yeah.
much and I want it. So
It's a balance of hybrid that every brand needs to have. They need to have the DCC for those special pocket markets, but also we need to have opportunity of access to market at scale and then directly to retail. I think that's the one big thing too is with our bill is some of these states like threw in those kinks where it was like no outside shipments into the state, and that's a big thing that's not in ours because it's like the only way this category accelerates is through education and exposure. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And like that's the only way it works.
Yeah, and I will tell you what is really heartening about all of this is when I go lobby in DC and I talk to, Senate leaders and staffers, you know, back, in July of last year, it was like, yeah, we're kind of aware of this, but can you educate us? And then I was back in September and they're like, yeah, we've been following this. What are the updates? And now, I was there back in uh probably
You
January. Yeah, and it was back to them now, and they're like, "Okay, tell us about the bill. Who's co-sponsoring it? How can we help?" What I continue to see this broader movement, and even today, like the New York Times just dropped an op-ed about this. That was awesome to see. Like
Mhm.
I was very excited to see something come out from them. And then like 3 days ago, they published something about cannabis and like a cannabis problem. And so, I think, you know, those two pieces from the New York Times is actually like the perfect it's like perfectly symbolic of what marks of confusion there is and what level of education that needs to continue to occur. And we want to help educate on these things. I mean, that's
Mhm.
part of what our goal is. And for states like yours, with Pennsylvania going through this, really good very symbolic of the regulatory bills being, brought forward. Yeah, like the dispensary thing, like that's a little crazy to me. Like I get it,
Yeah.
but it also shows that there's a lack of understanding of like what these things are and how they need to be treated somewhat cautiously, if that makes sense.
It is, and when you package it the right way, the way lawmakers like to hear it, and you talk about revenue and taxation, the easiest parallel that I give them is like because I lived it from in the craft beer boom. you look at Pennsylvania as one of the top producing as well as consumption states for alcohol, especially beer in the country. Even if you just broad stroked a percentage of that would become hemp beverage consumers on a regular basis, makes the state one of the top in the country as far as
Yeah.
potential revenue in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, again, I think part of what will be very interesting is, I think a lot of these brands, like I'm looking at a 5 to 10 year plan with this
Hmm.
group. I am not looking at like the next year or the next 6 months. I mean, I am obviously, but like
Right.
what I'm building towards is what does scale look like in this category, and what do we need to get that level of scale? Because we're in the snowball effect. Like we have momentum. Unfortunately, we have some pretty terrible bills that have been passed in the CR. But I also think there's a lot of there is a lot of uh, there are a lot of very smart people, and there's this coming together of alcohol, hemp. I think cannabis is also coming on board to some extent too to try to create some preservation. But it's a very fragile discussion at times because I've had times where I'm like, is alcohol trying to get rid of all of us? Like, is alcohol going to kill us? Or is it like cannabis going to kill us? Or is it, who's the next threat? I've learned in the last probably 6 months or so is to say, no, actually, we all have to find the alignment here. And we all have to play within the margins of comfort to determine policy. And even though I'm edibles, I still talk to a lot of the beverage trades. I'm really close with folks on the Hemp Beverage Alliance,
Hmm.
Kava. I try to stay in parallel because I don't think anybody wants the other one to go away, especially in ingestibles. Like, I don't think alcohol is trying to get rid of gummies or edibles or chews, but I don't think their focus is there. And my point is always like, hey, we support what you guys are doing. Just don't throw us out with what you are doing. And we're going to do the same thing. Let's work together because even the bill frameworks that are coming out at the federal level are all encompassing that include ingestibles, they include topicals and things like that. This to me is progress. And it's the first time with the Griffith bill, if you're familiar, it's the first
Hmm.
time we've had a comprehensive federal policy around hemp consumable products. And that's powerful. The only one
And
that exists is
yeah,
cosmetic.
and as from a state by state thing, like especially too, like certain states, it's not going to be able to come in at the same time, and that's
Yeah.
just the infrastructure of the ideologies of those states and the way that they govern. That some of these states, it's going to have to be a phased approach of beverages first, break the door open, and then the gummies and the other stuff can come in. And I think that's also causing that friction of like
Yeah.
feeling left out. You know what I mean? When really it's not. It's a systematic structure issue we have from.
Yeah, and I will tell you, like, I have great friends on the beverage side, and I have a really good friend who I won't name him now because I don't wanna put him out there, but, he got this pretty significant win in a major city, and, he and I have had so many very respectful conversations about, "Hey, man, don't just go for your thing," and he's like, "Well, don't you think just my thing is better?" And I'm like, "No, dude, let's do this to like." And I will tell you, like, I think that's how we all have to approach this discourse of like, I respect why he wants this thing. He's a beverage guy. He's got a beverage brand, an incredible beverage brand. And, and I think this is where I don't ever take offense to what he's doing because he's trying to do his business. Like,
Mhm.
I think that's fine. And I also think it's incumbent upon people like us to continue to try to get both covenances and be open about what covenants we want for regulatory and recognize, when this all washes out, I think we'll all be okay. I got to keep telling myself we'll all be okay. I think we genuinely will be, but I think
And
it's not without a lot of pain. And again, I go back to post Volstead Act until the 1935, federal liquor bill, alcohol bill was established that they created a regulatory framework. And, again, I think if you have a beverage that's available out there that's 5 milligrams of THC, you should have a gummy that's out there that has 5 milligrams. Arguably, I would say, there are health and wellness outcomes that come from gummies and chews that you don't get from beverages. I don't think that matters. I think that's also just better for the market
Mhm.
at large. And I think one of the realities is if you do get if you go beverage only or something like that, you're going to have a biomass issue. And that's the other thing. And farmers are still going to get hurt by that. That's a reality. I mean, 60%, 70% of the market are edibles today. 70% of biomass is for that. And let's just say, 25% is for beverages. Well, was still 70% off the table for farmers. Like, and so, all of these things, there's no right or wrong at this
Hmm.
point. It's just what kind of discourse can we have to get what we all want? And I think a lot of the people we associate with and work with are, yeah, low dose ingestible products are genuinely pretty okay. So let's try to get that worked out. And I think it's coming. Not without continued state by state battles that like I'm
Yeah,
constantly on the lookout for. Like, okay, who's up next? Okay, it's Ohio. Okay, it's New Jersey. Okay, it's Pennsylvania.
yeah.
Okay, it's Indiana. I mean, it's just going to constantly swirl. But we need federal protection to give state level regulators an opportunity to take a breath, not make rash decisions, and let us get more cohesive policy that will set us up for the future.
No, you're exactly right. And for any brands out there that are in the beverage space that don't have gummies or flour, even if it's nothing else, it's everything we just talked about of like meeting consumer where they are and realize that not your consumer doesn't ingest everything the same way you do. But also on top of that, speaking back from a marketing and PR standpoint, when you get to retail, you're going to realize the more touch points means the more brand engagement, which means the more stickiness to your brand. So if
Yeah.
you can be in three categories in a location as opposed to one on the shelf, it increases the opportunity for your customers to be there.
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing with cannabis too, right? So, like for regulated cannabis, if you have a mass market that is now being exposed to adopting THC products more universally, that's only going to help the long term where you have bifurcation of policy around THC milligram doses, right? Like this to me is having been on both sides.
Hmm.
The future to me is we're not talking about hemp or cannabis regulation. We are talking about THC regulation and thresholds of dosing standards, packaging sizes. You want X, you want, 5 to 10 milligrams, get it, most traditional places. If you want something stronger, go to a dispensary. And, I would argue that those products are far more intoxicating
Hmm.
in some ways at times than most of the stuff that's in a liquor store in terms of hemp beverages. And I think that's really where it's like, yeah, like we all have to look at the roadmap for the next 10 years. It's like, yeah, it's THC regulation, you know? And for cannabis companies who are vertical or make products, for them not to be in this space is crazy to me. It's like you want to extend your brand equity, you want to have more offerings, you want to pad your bottom line. It's not crazy expensive to take pre-existing formulation and swap out your, biomass formulations of THC oil from hemp. If you already know how to make it everywhere else, then that's a very easy step to extend your brand. And so, I get to have all these discussions with brands and, talk to cannabis people, THCA flower people. I talk to everybody because I think it's really good that we have these very tough conversations because when the rubber
Yeah.
meets the road, we're going to all have to make decisions.
Yeah, I've been averaging the past 2 months about 10 to 15 founders in the hemp space a week on conversations between episodes we're doing together or just strategy conversations. And I think you nailed it on everything. So I want to kind of I'll close out on this is that you have a flawless record right now as far as this conversation. But I also want to let you know that while we talk about it and everything like that all day long, I don't think it's talked about in the way we just did. And I want to remind everybody that Thomas and I have literally never met. We've never shaken hands. There is no script. There's no agenda. And I want to let you close out as well. But first, I just want to remind everybody that like Thomas, the cojones and the courage to come on and in this crazy world that we're in, but also to have the trust with your story and your business story and to give that to me and share that with me today. Like I need publicly always let you know that I really appreciate that and the courage to not have questions and to come on because we do get a lot of rejections of our invitations because people don't want to come on and they want to be prepped. So I commend you for that. Yeah, and I'll in case anybody was asleep or disappeared or was out of the car, just give them the website and kind of where they can find you guys.
Yeah, website. Well, first off, I appreciate that, Nate. Honestly, I would much prefer not having tons of prep time on something, and like to keep it as organic as possible. But you can find us very memorable. Edibles.com is our website where we have beverages. We have chews. We ship to 35 plus states across the U.S. and really happy to be a steward for this category. And I will just close by saying I'm rooting for a lot of brands, whether they're on the platform or not on the platform. I'm rooting for the category. I'm rooting for the people who are putting in the hard work here. And I'm also doing everything in my power, to keep it alive. And, I appreciate you, Nate, reaching out, taking the time. Glad you enjoyed our care package. Um, so
I'm still cruising through it. I've been taking it in doses, but I'm loving what I'm experiencing so far. And not to mention my big ass head. That hat was fantastic. So
oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
awesome. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, that was, yeah, always you know what, like, I'm like, Are people gonna wear a hat that says edibles.com on it?" Like, I don't
Oh
know.
yeah.
I do on the weekends, so and I get a lot of looks from people, but,
So
um
I'll say it. I don't. I do a no sponsorship, so this is an organic conversation. But I wear it. I'll tell everybody I do wear it.
Oh, I appreciate it. Well, Nate, it's been such a pleasure
Yes,
chatting with you, and, hopefully we can touch base again in a couple of months once hopefully dust settles, and, good luck in Pennsylvania. I know you guys have a big run ahead of you.
absolutely. And I'll send you some emails with some next steps as far as the episode goes and all that stuff. But I want to thank you again and kind of closing out for everybody. We live in this beautifully destructive world. There's a lot of opportunities, but the biggest thing you can control is not being a piece of shit out in public. So look a stranger in the eye as you're walking down the street. Hold a door for a stranger, male, female, German Shepherd. It doesn't matter. And ask the stranger how they're doing today and actually pause and wait and give a shit about what their response is. So thank you again, Thomas, for your time today and your courage. And everybody just keep being good out there and put those positive vibes out in the world.
Awesome.
All
Cheers.
right. You have a good rest of your day. Thanks, buddy.
All right. See you, Nate.